Uh, Hi everyone, welcome to a new edition of our Chilean Probability Seminar. Today I have the pleasure of introducing Roberto Fernandez from NYU Shanghai, who's going to be talking to us about central limit, local central limit, and equivalence of ensembles for spin systems.
Okay. Thanks, Santiago. Thanks a lot for the invitation and at the campus. I'm very happy, at least the part I have known so far. So what I'm going to discuss today, in fact, is a bunch of, in a sense, old ideas. These are topics that were introduced in statistical mechanics long ago, at least in the book by Kim Chin, which is 1949, to give you an idea. But there are a few issues that we were curious about. First, these are three different topics whose proof you find more or less dispersed in the literature with different people and different methods, but however, belong to the same circle of ideas. So, and the second is that in all the available proofs, there are some restrictions on the type of interaction or the type of spin, things like that, that don't seem very natural. So what we started doing, in fact, my co-authors started doing, and then I was invited, is to try to find out, first, the most general framework in which these ideas should work, and second, sort of a unifying presentation. So to show somehow one way to show that basically all these issues follow for more or less a single, if you wish, technical or hard estimation, and then the rest is a corollary. So there's some central thing that you have to control, and the rest follow. So that was our main motivation. So I list there my co-authors, and the only problem my co-authors have is that I am part of the authors, and so this paper has not been published yet because I still owe things to do. But okay, tough luck. Y si no estará funcionando. Okay, so I'm going to start as a general presentation of the issue before going into more detailed discussion of the hypothesis. And my goal here is just to show how all these issues are related, and the strategy to prove all of them from a single technical estimate. And at the end, I'm going to tell you what the technical estimate is and which is the tool that you use to solve it. But I'm not going to go into the actual technical estimation because that would be complicated, and it's not something that is nice to tell in a conference. It's full of detail. So this is a traditional spin model in a lattice setup, so just this called lattice CD, with some spin space E, which is going to be unidimensional but rather general for us, depending on the result you will see. And then a two-body interaction to which we can add a single body interaction, which is a magnetic field. Many of the things can be generalized, but our goal was to go for the basic family of results, which involves two-body interaction. Okay, so once you I review a little bit, I don't know the background of people, so I review a little bit the statistical mechanical construction. So once you have this interaction, you construct what you call the Hamiltonian, which is what I wrote there. This Hamiltonian here includes, so you have a finite box lambda, all the sides in the box. At each side there is a spin sigma x, which is an element of the space E, and you have this interaction coupling pairs of spins, but in this expression all within lambda. So it's like the outside of lambda didn't exist. If you want to put external conditions that I call here omega, you have to introduce the terms linking these spins omega outside with the spin sigma inside. And that gives this extra term added to the Hamiltonian with free boundary conditions, and this corresponds to the Hamiltonian with boundary condition only. Once you have that, you construct the finite Gibbs measure, finite volume Gibbs measure with boundary condition omega, which is a Gibbs measure with density written there. Okay, this is e to the minus beta h divided by the normalization. And nu is a general a priori measure, which is product measure, and the measure at each side is, if we are assuming to be the same, you can generalize a little bit if you want, and it depends on the space you consider for the speed. But it's kind of a natural choice. So what are the theorems I want to discuss? Now, the mean with the measure you are dealing with, and you divide by the standard deviation. That the log and the Gibbs measure of this centralized and normalized magnetization converges to the normal. Okay? If this happens, then you have a central limit theorem. There's a central limit theorem, sometimes called it integral central limit theorem, for the magnetization. Okay, which is more or less what people are interested. I'm gonna describe it in a different way in a show. Now, this is the usual central limit theorem. This is more or less telling you that these Gibbs measures, from the point of view of the magnetization, are weakly correlated. So they obey the same thing as if they were independent, a central limit. Now, the local central limit involves the density of the Gibbs measure. So if you consider this Gibbs measure projected on the magnetization, the centralized magnetization, it's going to have a certain density that you call P there, which is obtained from the density of the Gibbs, but applied to composed with the magnetization. Now, the local central limit theorem means that the density of this measure on the magnetization converges itself to the density of the normal. Okay, that's why it's called a local. It's called local. There's a convergence of densities. It's more detailed convergence than the global one or integral. But now there is a natural question: why do you bother? Why do you want this type of detail if about central limit theorem should be enough? And the answer is, in fact, the goal of this is to prove equivalence of ensemble. So I'm going to pause here and give you a rough idea of what is this notion of equivalence of ensemble. This comes from physics. So before going into the actual mathematical formalization, I would like to give you an idea. So this comes to the roots of statistical mechanics. So Boltzmann, end of the 19th century, he proposed 3 ways of estimating observables, macroscopic observables, from the microscopic model. The first one is to consider, so he was dealing, imagine yourself, you're dealing with a volume with gas particles moving around. A certain number, capital N of particles, and a certain energy. So as the energy is conserved, if the volume is closed, the number of particles is also conserved. So in there he said, in order to compute expectation, you should use what is called, since then, ensemble. The microcanonical ensemble is you take averages of all the possible distributions, in fact, with equal probability, among all have the energy and the particles fixed. This microcanonical ensemble allows you to cover the number of possibilities, and from the entropy, you can obtain the rest of the thermodynamics. So this was a way to explain thermodynamics. Now, very shortly, Boltzmann realized that this type of average, which is called a microcanonical ensemble, was very much limited for two reasons. First, the calculations are very tough. It's very complicated to do computations when you have this highly non-local constraint of having a total energy fixed. Very difficult, except for the ideal gas. I don't know of any other example of a successful calculation. But also, it was not very realistic, because in real life, you don't have a completely adiabatic system, so a system that is isolated and doesn't exchange energy with the rest. The most realistic way is to consider a whole universe that it itself, yes, is completely closed and adiabatic, but you are looking to a small window inside there. So the energy conserved throughout the universe, but not in the window. So what probability you should use without the window when it's not totally, the energy can change. And this gave rise to what is called the canonical ensemble, which is the traditional Gibbs measure we use in mathematics, which tells you that the energy is not conserved, but what is common to the outside and inside is the temperature. And the temperature is related with the average energy. So you replace fixed energy by average energy and through another parameter, which is the temperature. So you pass to the canonical ensemble in which the number of particles is fixed, but not the energy. The final frontier is to liberate also the number of particles. This gives rise to the so-called grand canonical ensemble, in which now not only the energy can flow to the exterior, but also the particles move in and out. So as the same as for the case of the energy, you introduce a temperature that is the set common to both inside and outside and regulates the mean energy. In the macrocanonical ensemble, you introduce another factor mu, which is called the Gibbs free energy. No, Gibbs potential, sorry, which regulates the number of particles. So instead of having a fixed number of particles, you have a certain potential, and in this potential you get an average number. So you are replacing fixed constraints by average constraints, and this makes the calculation simpler. Now, for each ensemble, you obtain a different thermodynamic potential. From the Gibbs measures, you obtain the free energy. From the macrocanonical ensemble, you obtain the pressure. And through all Maxwell relations, the idea is that from any of these thermodynamic potential, you obtain the other ones, and the thermodynamics is the same no matter which ensemble, that is, which family of measures you use. Now, this more or less is clear that the thermodynamic is more or less the same. More or less, because there's still the problem of phase transition. Thermodynamics is insensitive to phase transition. You have to go a little beyond it. And this part is not clear yet, that the three ensembles are the same. They should be. All physics has been developed under the assumption that it is, but still there are gaps. But there is an even deeper question, and that's the one we want to handle here, and it comes from the Russians. Okay, maybe things are okay at the thermodynamic level. Are they okay at the statistical mechanical level? That is to say, if you consider the Gibbs measure with a given number of particles fixed, in the limit, do they give you the same averages as if you consider the macrocanonical measures in which there is a potential mu, but the number of particles is free, as long as you fix mu so that the average number of particles is the same as the one in the Gibbs measure with fixed number. So whether in the limit, they give you the same expectation. That's the actual problem of equivalence of ensembles at the statistical mechanical level. And as far as,
Roberto,
yes,
so at which level are you taking the limits? So it is it's like local limits or
it's you take
scaling?
lambda k, and these boxes grow to, it's an exhaustive family, grow to the whole of CD. So when you take the
Okay, so it's a discrete limit. So it's like a local limit, not a scaling limit.
No, not scaling. No, you fix everything, just change the volume. It's a thermodynamic limit. That's not scaling. You're not looking for fixed point, nothing. So now if you translate what I just told you in your, the funny thing is that the arguments that Boltzmann gave for the equivalence of ensemble are the only ones that exist in all physics books. Even the most modern one, they reproduce the arguments that Boltzmann gave. Now, in mathematical physics, very little is done to prove rigorously these things. And in fact, I think that the results are more or less what I'm going to present now. So I gave you in the standard setting in which you have particles that move around. Instead of using particles, you think in spins in a lattice, then forget about the microcanonical. The canonical ensemble is characterized by a temperature and by a fixed magnetization instead of a fixed number of particles. The magnetization, the total number, the value of the total spin is fixed. And the grand canonical will be when you add a magnetic field, so it's also a good measure, but you add a magnetic field, associate so that the mean value of this new measure with the magnetic field is precisely the magnetization that you keep in the macrocanonical, in the canonical ensemble. So this is what we want to prove. We want to prove that is in the limit, is the same to take a measure in which the magnetization is not constrained, but the average is constrained, converges to the same measure as the one in which the magnetization is constant. That's the equivalence of ensemble. So here, what I write here in the first line is the canonical ensemble. So there is when the magnetization is total magnetization is constrained to a certain number n k. So this corresponds to a Gibbs measure with that constraint. And the canonicals are the usual Gibbs measure in which you add this magnetic field HK, which has to be adjusted. So as in the last line says, the average of the magnetization is precisely this number you want to fix. So the equivalence of the canonical, of the macrocanonical and canonical ensemble is precisely these two measures. One with NK fixed and the other is HK tuned up to have an NK as the mean value of the magnetization, they converge to the same in the infinite volume. That's the issue. Okay? Okay, now what is known about this? So the central limit theorem, the validity of the central limit theorem is old story, at least from 1949, that's as far as I follow. And the strategy to prove it is exactly the strategy used to prove the central limit theorem in probability. You show that the characteristic function converges to the normal characteristic, e to the minus sigma squared by 1. Okay? And to do that, there are, in fact, in the literature, there are two types of proofs. One, which is very successful, is controlling the pair correlation. So the idea is you go into a normal law when the random variable, the variables at each side are weakly correlated. So weakly correlated and not correlated should be the same in the limit, and then you should go to the normal law. How do you see the correlation of these individual side random variables? Where you control the pair correlation. So with suitable control of pair correlations, you can prove the central limit theorem. And the most important, most spectacular result on this regard is, with using this technique, is Newman, in the 80s, which he showed that if the system satisfies the FKG inequality, which is family of inequalities of the twin system, then he can prove central limit theorem valid all over the phase diagram, except at the critical temple. It's a spectacular result, extremely general, but also very constrained, because FKG is a very particular property. In particular, you cannot deal with systems that are not Fermat. Now, a second type of proof is by controlling partition function. And the idea is to go into the free energy, which is the log of the partition function, proving that it's analytic. And then through Cauchy, you can obtain that the derivatives are bounded, and in such way you obtain that the expectation converges to the convergence of the characteristic function. Now, there are two ways of doing this. One is through a linear theorem, which is followed by absence of zero of the partition function. The second way, which is the one we're going to use, is what is called brute force, which is cluster expansion. And this was proposed by Dobrushin. The first I saw it briefly by Dobrushin in his posthumous review, I think, 1994. The guy that half a page, 4 lines proof. It's very nice. And that's the one we're going to go. The star means is the technique we're going to do. Now,
You see,
this is, sorry.
because people can see this, I think. I'm gonna try to.
Okay. So the last thing I want to say that so far, this cause of the hypothesis. The results, published results are for finite spins, so the space E is finite, an infinite range, or infinite spins. The spins can be any real number, but finite range. The interaction cannot go beyond a certain number. We are able to deal with both things at the same time. It's not earth shattering, but and it shows that our methods are not realisms. Okay, now, that was a key. If you move that doesn't work.
But it should work. Let's try again.
No.
Sorry. No, la televisión está bien.
Si no, lo cambié de ahí.
Y creo que hay que hacerle clic a la pantalla,
Ah, ok.
que se desconectó. O sea,
Sí.
como donde está ahí.
Ok,
Gracias.
gracias, Pablo. Listo.
Bueno, respecto del local central limit theorem. In fact, the actual result that people prove, and we are not an exception, is to prove that central limit theorem implies also the local central limit theorem. Therefore, they are equivalent, because it's very easy to show that local central limit theorem implies it. So this is the actual theorem. And in fact, if you read the central limit theorem, in most situations, there are maybe a little changes in the temperature. You are getting almost for free the local central limit theorem. The proof is not for free. And the key is now you have to control the integrand of the characteristic function, as I will show in a little while. So you have to start bounding integrals of ratios of partition functions. And again, there are two techniques. One is through characterization in the Dobrushin in 77. I'm sorry, not the first. The first was Del Grosso in 74. And he used cluster expansion. And that's what I'm going to use, because this makes it unified with the older technique of proof proposed by Lewis. And again, you have different research published for finite spins and infinite range. The best results prove this equivalent. But the central limit theorem is only valid at high temperature. Okay, So in a sense, local central limit theorem varies exactly at the temperature that is the center of the temperature, and we can extend to a bounded space infinite range, but also on the heavy. And the method we use is the method proposed by the groups. For equivalence of ensembles, the observation is that the local central limit theorem implies equivalence of ensembles. This is an observation heuristically done by Kinchin very early, and the first guy that really spelled it out, and we are going to use exactly what they did, was Dobrushyn and Tirossi in 1977. And so people can do it, can extend it. Tirossi extended with two more collaborators to unbounded discrete spins with finite range. We can go to infinite range, but our spins have to be bounded and discrete. So we lose a little bit there. Out of laziness. I'm sure it can be done, but I already have delayed the publication long enough. So now, what is the novelty of our approach? What are we proposing? And again, this is not a revolutionary paper, but I think it could be useful. On the one hand, we generalize most of the results, except in this case. So it tells you the limit and up to which type of systems you could expect this type of result. But the other thing that for me is satisfying, that there's a unified. There is a single technical convergence result where you have to put all your artillery and the rest for. Okay. And unfortunately, it's technical, it's cluster expansion, which is technical. It depends on whom you talk about. People are familiar with cluster expansion consider it to be not that technical, but if you are coming to the topic, it could be overwhelming, at least the writing. Okay, so this is the end of the general presentation. So these are the ideas. This is what we add in our paper. Now I want to enter into a little more detail. I hope we have time. How 30 minutes. Oh yeah, plenty of time. On exactly the systems we consider and the strategy we use to prove. And what are the things we have to technically estimate. And I will stop there. Okay. So the configuration, as I said, is a lattice spin system. So you have a lattice CD and a space E, which could be the whole real line. Or if it is bounded, it's in an interval, and I'm using. Now, there is an a priori single spin measure, which comes with the space E. If the space E, for instance, is finite, typically is the usual Lebesgue measure or Hahn measure if you want, normalize it. If it is discrete, it's the counting measure, normalize it if you prefer. Now, if it is unbounded, you take, in general, this could be a more general one, Lebesgue, but then you have to add a weight to make it into a probability measure. So we have to use this extra F, which has to be present only in the case in which the spins are unbounded. And we need some properties of it. Okay, it has to be such that it makes mu a finite, so I can normalize it. F has to be differentiable, and the derivative has to have a sub-Gaussian behavior. So that means I can integrate all the products of spins that I want. I get all type of correlations and they are finite. I shouldn't worry for integration. Typically, F is kind of a Gaussian type of thing. Okay, now the interactions. I'm going to be a little more general than the usual results on central and local central limit theorem because I'm aiming for equivalence of ensemble. And as I will show later, equivalence of ensembles became a particular case of the local central limit theorem, but for a system that is not homogeneous. Okay, it's a system that has a non-homogeneous magnetic field. So H changes with X, but it has to be bounded above H. I don't really need also J to be translation invariant. This is not part of the issue. So I take this supremum. Otherwise, it's at the use of summability. Of course, you can assume if you want translation invariant. And then this is the last line, is the superstability assumption. That's the role of F, this weight of my a priori measure, has to be such that when I integrate the exponential of minus F and minus beta, I get e to the minus something squared in sigma. And that allows exponential and to the square, that allows me to control everything, everything I need, every correlation I need, including exponential integration, exponential correlations. E to the sigma is integrable with this weighted. But that's not, so this is only for the unbounded case, and it's kind of nothing. In most cases, that's what you have. Boundary conditions are an issue if you want to go to unbounded spins, because you see the problem if you have unbounded spins, you can set up boundary conditions so bad that they grow at infinity in such a way that all these couplings, J, X, Y, omega, Y, becomes non-sum. And then statistical mechanics disappears. So you have to constrain the possible omegas that you put outside to such that they have a finite energy contribution in every side inside your box. And that's the constraint you have to do. You can do with a little less than that, maybe almost all and things like this, but this is natural enough for us, and I think it's not a bad thing. Now, in particular, if the spins are bounded, then I have no problem. All the boundary conditions are acceptable, and this is fine. For bounded cases, and easier for our team. Okay, here are the results, and then I go into the study. So for the central limit theorem, we prove that there is a beta that depends on the upper bound of the edges, for which the central limit theorem holds in the sense of my definition in original for the normalized magnetization for the higher ten. Okay, so the limit of that applied to functions of the magnetization converges to the normal average of this function of the magnetism. Relations, the local one, we prove that CLT, that the central limit theorem implies the local CLT, which immediately means equivalent, no? But this is the non-trivial part. For bounded spins at all beta, we don't add anything to what other people did, except that we can put unbounded interaction, or in general, a high enough beta. Okay. For bounded spin, the implication is at all beta. The implication. So assuming CLT is true, local is true at all beta for bounded spin, except that CLT is not true at all beta. So let's not be confused about it. But the actual implication, yes, it works. Finally, for equivalence of ensembles, you can prove it for this time bounded and discrete spins. So these are spins you have the countable measure.
High beta or high temperature?
High temperature, thank you. Low beta. Yeah, sorry. High temperature. Yeah, this is a high temperature. So before, okay, now I think I say
So sorry, I got a little bit lost here in these results. So this CLT implies local CLT. So the measures new that you put as base measures, they are also absolutely continuous with respect to Lebesgue to have something like that?
Well, you don't really need it, but usually it's the Lebesgue. But you need the integrability of everything that is there. No, you don't need that.
No, no.
But like if it was a discrete, like let's say a discrete Gaussian, then I would not expect.
Discrete is countable. So you see, I have some measure, the sigma. I don't specify, but then yes, I had to put
No,
away.
but that's Lebesgue, like this sigma is Lebesgue, right?
Well, it's a border measure. This is it could be I don't know, could be a part of the real numbers, and you have some border
Okay,
thing.
but e to the minus f is the density, right?
Yeah, so there is absolutely continuous with respect to the a priori version this measure the sigma, which need not be bounded. It's not bounded.
Yes.
Typical is Lebesgue. Typical is Lebesgue. I don't think we use
But
any.
it cannot be, let's say, a measure on a Cantor, for example.
It could be. We are not. Yeah, we don't use anything particularly of.
But somehow, so there is something weird, because I think that local CLT, you were assuming that you have a Radon-Nikodym derivative with respect to Lebesgue of the sum of the average.
Oh,
In local,
So I understood that for the local CLT, you had a convergence of densities.
yeah, this is the convergence of densities. Yeah. So
Yes, but you cannot. It's not obvious that that the average always has a density with respect to Lebesgue. So at least you need that.
its density. Let me see if I put it
Yes. So maybe I got lost there.
there. So there is a density. I put it because yes, the point is before thank you. It's a very good point. You see, this is the density of the measure projected on the values of the magnetization. You see,
Yes.
I'm considering not the original mu, but mu on observables that are a function of SK. Look
Which
at
is
this.
just the average, no? Is the average of the magnetization?
Yeah, it's some average, is some average of some function of the magnetization. SK bar is the centralized and normalized magnetization. But it could be any
Yeah,
function. This is so this is something that is on the space of SK. And that yes is clear.
that always at a density?
In this case, in the cases time with the A to the minus beta H, I think yes. But maybe.
Yes, but the base measure needs to be absolutely continuous with respect to Lebesgue, or at least something like that. Like that one was discrete.
So okay, so okay, let's put it an assumption. I need this density P, which this is absolutely continuous with respect to Lebesgue because X is a real number. Yeah, a real number is completely bad. In the discrete case, P is one number for each value of the magnetization. Okay, and the dx is the current. You see? So there is some generality, but yeah, and maybe I have to think whether you could have how general examples of current. But we didn't use any particular property of the Lebesgue other than existence of the integral that we need, especially correlation. But maybe yes, maybe we should be careful. So I mean, written as assumption is fine. The question is whether some assumptions are superfluous or some assumptions are only verified when everything is correct. Without we didn't. So here are our results. So basically, I'm having enough temperature to have the three things for a very good reason, because the proofs are basically rely on the same, as we will show. But again, you see, the central limit theorem is natural to be expected at high enough temperature, which is when the systems are not very correlated. The spin system. For the other, for instance, the equivalence of ensembles, we have it in the least interesting region. We are having in a region where there are no phase transitions, where there is only one possible infinite volume state. So, big deal. The big question is, in presence of phase transition, whether you can reproduce the different phases through the equivalence of ensemble. This is totally open, and I think quite far from what we can do. Okay, so this is all we can do. This is all that has been done. And in fact, the equivalence of ensembles, I repeat, is the reason the reason for the interest of the local central limit theorem. Without this equivalent, the local central limit theorem would be a curiosity. The central limit theorem is not. But the equivalence of ensembles requires the local central limit. Okay, so now I start giving you the strategies. How do you prove these things? Modulo the last technical explanation. So, to prove the central limit theorem, we follow the evolution, which tells you take the characteristic function. The only thing, the characteristic function, instead of an IT, you put a set. Could have a little real part, less complex. And because you want to use Cauchy. So if you can prove that the logarithm of this characteristic function is analytic, is bounded by the volume, and the correlation is not zero, so it's bounded below by the volume, then you can conclude using Cauchy that when you take the limit when k goes to infinity of the log of this characteristic function, you give you z square over 2, which means that the characteristic function goes to e z square over 2, which is the norm. Okay. So you see that you need to take the log of this expectation of a complex exponential and prove analyticity and bounds. How this is proven, then you take the difference between what you want to do, and basically you have analyticity, you have that at zero, the function and the first two derivatives are zero, then by Cauchy, the function on the over z cube is analytic in the radius and is bounded by the value of the function on the boundary of the disk, which is what I wrote in the right hand side. And as dk goes as lambda to the, I have it here, lambda, dk goes as lambda, potential lambda, so dk to the third, the square root to the third is lambda to the 3/2, but f goes as lambda to the first power. When I take the volume, the infinite volume limit, the whole bound goes to 0, and I get that the log of the partition, the characteristic function converges to 0. So a very simple argument, extremely simple argument that I saw for the first time in the evolution in '94, and this shows that what you have to estimate is this log of this. For the local central limit theorem, you use only one expression is the key. The relation between the densities is the Fourier transform of the relation between the characteristic function. This is a simple exercise of Fourier transform. Okay? So, if you want to prove that the absolute value of the left goes to 0, you need to bound the absolute value of the right. And basically what you do, you forget the EITX of the Fourier transform, and you see that you have to bound the L1 conversions of this expression. Okay? So central limit theorem is pointwise conversions of mu e to the z to e to the z square over 2, pointwise. Local central limit theorem is L1 conversions. That's the difference technically. Of course, it's a sufficient condition because they are forgetting the e to the ITX. Okay, now how do you do this? How do you bound this integral? And this again, we follow the composition that was already proposed by Tirossi, the original Tirossi in '77, except that they didn't have the last term that I'm going to use because their spins were bound. People since then only use it for bounded spins, so that's that you are introduced. So what they do, you have to integrate to do this into the ITSK. So let's think T as a frequency. So we bound into low frequencies and high frequencies. Low frequencies is less equal than capital B in absolute value. Now, the low frequencies, when you integrate between B and minus B, then the central limit theorem shows you that this integral between B and minus B goes to zero. Because pointwise goes to zero, and then you have bounded conversions, bounded conversions. Okay? So low frequency that's the part where the central limit theorem implies the local central limit theorem. The central limit theorem allows you to control the low frequency. For the high frequency part, you have to do the difference. You do it in a very brutal way. You put the absolute value of the difference as the sum of the absolute value. The first term, integral of minus b squared over 2, this is an integral function, so if b is large enough, you can make this as small as you want. This is out of the problem. And then you have to find the other part for t less than 1. And for this part, you do another decomposition into 3 frequency domains. It becomes annoying, but not. So you bound you have to find the integral of this expectation of integrality scheme. So soft frequencies is for t between b and a certain thing that grows with square root of the k as it should, because really is t over square root of the k, the radical. So this is the soft, the difference by b, you determine it in the next step. Okay? So all these limits go to infinity from k goes to infinity, but we can grows as the volume of lambda. So the third is half frequency. That's the new term. Is you need t to be sufficiently large, and then you can control this. Now the mechanism of control is different. In the soft frequency, you work is controlled to second order, and you basically medium frequencies you use some trigonometric that's the trick. And high frequency, there you have to use the factor f to really bounce this. You integrate by part, that's why f prime has to be well behaved. And this is the new part that you don't need if the spins are bound. Now, what do you do for equivalence of ensemble? The proof of equivalence of ensembles, this again, Dobrushin-Tirossi, you use Bayes. You want to prove that Q and mu for a given configuration and a certain volume delta have the same probability. Think that now the spins are discrete. Well, Q is the mu constrained on having Sk equal Nk. You use Bayes and you go to the ratio in which now the expectations are over Sk equal Nk, and the constraint is alpha, sigma being alpha in this little region delta. Okay, so you end up having to prove that, let me not do it yet, that, look further to the right, that this constrained this measure where alpha is equal to sigma converges in the limit to the unconstrained one. Now the constrained one, if you fix some of the spins, this generates a magnetic field on the spins that are not fixed due to the coupling of these fixed spins with the other one.
But what's sigma here?
Sigma is the value of so sigma is the value of the spin at delta. I don't know, maybe it's not a good notation. You want to constrain that at delta you have a fixed value alpha.
Okay.
Sigma I consider it to be a variable.
Okay.
Okay. So if you say that at this delta you fix alpha, then all the other spins fill this alpha through the two-body interaction, which amounts to a magnetic field, which is a non-translation invariant magnetic field, non-homogeneous, and that's why the generality favours neither favours. Okay. Now, if the local central limit theorem is true for both terms on the right, that's why we want to prove it uniformly in all these H's and T, then what happens? The constraint expectation goes to the expectation into the minus S, what will be S squared. But S squared is what I want to write. I'm writing n because I'm fixing S equal to n. But it's basically S tilde, which I denoted as the normalized. So this is the normalized n. And the unconstrained one also converges. Except that there is a small difference. The n alpha k is centered with respect to the constrained move, and the nk is centered with respect to the unconstrained. So you need, this is the n, normalized. You need to prove that these n's, in fact, in the limit disappear, the difference disappear. So I think for me, this is a very nice observation. This is very nice. That in fact, this equivalence of ensembles via base amounts to considering the same measure, but in one case constrained to a finite number of pins being fixed. Now, this is the case of discrete spins. If the spins are continuous, this is not the right. You cannot ask for S to be exactly n. You have to allow for errors, epsilons. I'm sure there is a formalization very similar. Again, laziness. We didn't have time. But at least with this, it shows clearly that local central limit theorem, which is the two lines in the bottom, implies the equivalence of ensemble. Okay. So now I go for the technical estimate. Do I have 5 minutes? Basically, if you look carefully, what I have to estimate, so for instance, in the central limit theorem, I have to do the expectation of this e to the z sum of sigma plus a constant, which is the centralization, which is irrelevant. And this you can write as a quotient of partition function. On the top, you take the sum overall e to the minus beta h plus zeta sigma. And on the bottom is e to the minus beta h without zeta sigma. So you are making the quotient of partition functions with one with z and the other with zero. Okay? And for the LCT, sorry, not CFT, LCT is for IT instead of Z. But you have the same situation. So the game is to bound this ratio in such a way that you obtain the conditions required to prove the central limit theorem. And to bound this ratio, the best way is the cluster expansion. So, in a nutshell, what is a cluster expansion? It's a way to write the logarithm of a partition function as a sum over some object called clusters of a geometric thing. This omega t of c is totally geometric. The interaction of the beta or the h doesn't enter there. Times the weights, zeta, these weights carry beta, h, all the parameters, but the geometry is the same. So when you do the ratio on the partition function, it becomes the exponential of a sum in which the combinatorial part, which is the top part, is common. And then you do just the difference of these activities, zeta, in one case and in the other. And there you can use Taylor, or you can use other techniques. So this really simplifies a lot. So how do you obtain, and the last thing I'm going to say, how do you obtain this omega t, this expansion in terms of clusters, and very quickly, how do you prove that this converges, and therefore the analyticity another one. The standard case is when you can write a partition function as an ideal gas partition. So these are particles, which in fact is called gamma, which in most applications are contours, which are free except that they cannot overlap. So the only interaction is border, they cannot overlap. That's the last product of indication. And then they have individual activities. So once you write a partition function in this way, then there is an automatic machine that you can use. Basically, a Russian paper will say, we write this way, and then you use cluster expansion, end of it. Okay? Why you can say that? Because then it is well known that the log has the same weights, but a different omega, geometrical factor, which in fact is well known. I'm going to present it just to tell you, to emphasize my point, but don't worry. So it considers graphs formed families gamma 1, gamma n that have to be connected, overlapping between them. So the opposite of the condition for compatibility, they have to be incompatible. And you draw a graph using as vertices the gammas and as links the fact that they overlap, and you count all the possible subgraphs, and you weight it is -1 to the number of n. So this is a purely geometrical factor, very complicated to deal with because it has a huge number of terms with alternating signs. And the conversion depends on a careful cancellation. You cannot put absolute value there because everything is closed. That would make things a little delicate. But they have been studied for a long time. And there is a theory that tells you that you only have to consider the partition function formed by all the objects that intersect clusters that intersect a given gamma zero. So you consider all the possible gammas that form a cluster that intersect gamma zero. So you sum only over this one cluster. All possible, from one single cluster, all possible choices of this cluster intersecting gamma zero. If this sum converges for some mu, then by choosing lambda equal to this ratio, this lambda gives the radius of convergence of the cluster. So this is a very nice theory that comes from some graph decomposition in terms of trees. I'm not going to enter into that, but my point is that once you can write the partition function as an ideal gas, you can enter into automatic pilot. You know that the free energy, the logarithm of the partition function is the form I got before. And moreover, you only have to do, the hard part is to show that this phi gamma zero converges, which is much simpler than the original thing. It's only one class. That's where all the technicalities center in this thing. Once you have that this converges, then all the proofs that I mentioned follow with minor adaptation. And that's totally uniform. And that's why everything, all these three results, boil down to a single technical estimate, which is the convergence of this. And you get for free bounds and everything you want. Okay? The papers. So these are the rules of the game with the cluster expansion approach. Write your partition function as an ideal class form, and then use the fundamental theorem to conclude. That's it. You don't need to do the combinatorics. It has been done for you. And there is a way to write it. Let me not go very much. There is a technique, and you can write it. And that's the hard part of the paper. Write it in this way, and then show that the convergence of this phi gamma zero that I told you. So just to conclude, the message is that all these ideas center at least a high template. Historically, the proofs are, but it helps to understand that there's a common thread, this idea, and maybe open possibility to generalize more. Many of these things can be generalized as long as still we have to recognize the interest for actual hardcore physicists is very limited because it only works in the high temperature regime where there are no phase transitions, we can say, yeah, it's true. Okay, that's it.
Thank you, Roberto. Any questions? Any questions?
So
I have a
if I
question.
if I
but,
understood, yes. Sorry.
Dale, Belio,
So
sí,
I don't know
yes,
if you,
go.
yes. So if I understood correctly, then essentially you just need a local limit theorem. So it doesn't have to be central for essentially to have the the grand canonical to be equal to the canonical ensemble, no?
You're right. Except that the proof we have of the local central limit use the central limit for this low frequency path, if you remember. Okay.
Yes,
If you
but you
remember,
could be converging to whatever other thing that was reasonable enough,
yeah. So if you could
like
prove the local,
like an exponential, let's say, random variable.
yeah. So I mean, yeah, good. I don't know. Yes. So
Because I was thinking for the case of let's say Ising model at critical temperature or things like that, where
yeah, that's
you are
that.
not
Yeah, that would be.
when you're not Gaussian anymore.
Yeah. So yes, I think the base argument holds that he proved it runs the ensemble. But then to prove that this ratio of conditioning and non-conditioning this measure converges to one, there is where you use the local central limit theorem. And in fact, that the converges to the normal form, it really doesn't play a role. That means you just need that they converge to the same thing. So you're right, it could be another law, as long as it is the same. Yeah, you're right.
See, and I had another question, but I forgot, so I leave. Santi had a question.
No, so these results are like only for a high temperature, and I guess the beta is the one given by the convergence of the cluster expansion.
Yeah.
Right? So
Yes.
you don't know.
Yeah, it's a big limitation.
You don't know if it holds until the critical temperature or something.
Not at all. No.
Yeah.
No. We should, otherwise we have to take a completely different approach.
Completely open, like for low temperature, people don't know.
But we in terms of contours, would we think in doing something like this at low temperatures? I don't know. What to mean the local central limit theorem, what is the right? Well, probably you have to consider the magnetization for Ising, because the plus and minus state. But then I don't know. But then you have to write in terms of contours.
So, but there's the slope that the central limit theorem implies the local central limit theorem holds for all beta in some case. Which case?
Is in finite range and finite spins. No, in finite spins, not finite. Finite spins. In finite spins is for all beta. There is a trick also introduced by the evolution anti-Rossi of dilution.
Okay.
So you can dilute and eventually end up proving that as an upper bound you have the independent case. But only holds when you can take supreme over boundary condition. Therefore, you need boundary splits. Okay.
Okay.
So I remember my question.
Okay.
So, yeah, so what happens when you essentially condition, or you take a temperature, but you condition on having much higher spin than typical? So you could get in some kind of large deviation story. So you could one something say the relationship between somehow or how this is going to look like? in this thermodynamical limit?
What is the following? What you are doing is you are you are adjusting the magnetic field at the given temperature. So the mean magnetization is the one you decided
I
to
see.
fix. Okay, so
Ah,
in your question, the only thing would be if you don't have a way to you want to condition on a magnetization that is beyond the scope, then of course that's involved. But other than that, I
yeah,
think this is
I see. I understood. Thank you. Thank you for the talk. It was really fun.
Okay, if there are no more questions, then we thank Roberto again.
okay. Well, thank you for being here.
Sorry
And
for
now-
not being there.